Hey guys, my name is Jordan Koss. Welcome to the Almost Essential podcast. This 16-episode series is based off my final project for my Doctorate of Ministry degree at Fuller Theological Seminary. The title of that final project is Almost Essential Evangelists, Improving Retirement Asset Accumulation for Mainstream Church of Christ Pastors. In this series, we will interview 8 different specialists in 8 separate episodes. And we will also interview 2 pastors from each of 8 different regions around the U.S. This final project was inspired by 10 years of ministry in 3 different churches of Christ from Georgia to Northern California from 2010 to 2019, as well as my time as a financial professional in training in 2020. That is where I learned about the retirement crisis America is in and will be experiencing in the coming years. Now, I have 3 goals for this podcast. 1, provide an accessible, denomination-specific qualitative conversation for Church of Christ pastors and leaders. 2, introduce leaders and listeners to retirement vehicles and strategies they may not have heard about before. And 3, provide encouragement, motivation, and knowledge to save for the last third of life. Thank you for listening and enjoy. All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Almost Essential. My name is Jordan Koss, your host. I have with me my co-host, Lars Coburn. Lars, say a few words to our audience and listeners.
Yeah, well, I'm sitting here in my office at Bushnell University in Eugene, Oregon, and loving the chance to visit and learn more about retirement and pastors and how we can help each other. Maybe not get educated to be financial geniuses, although hopefully today we might be a little bit more educated about these things. But yeah, just that we can surround ourselves with good input about how to finish our ministry strong and serve God even in the third age of our lives, past our usefulness. And I'm just grateful that Jordan's doing this project, and my ministry years now have transitioned me into a church relations role at a university, and I get to do this work of connecting resources to churches and pastors so that they can flourish. And so I'm grateful to be part of the project. Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah, thank you, Lars. And with us today, our special guest is Austin Harwood. I pronounced that correctly? Yes?
Yeah,
all right.
I don't do flooring, so it's not hardwood. It's just hardwood.
Yeah, got it. I was going to say, do you have any mahogany on hand?
Exactly.
All right. So, Austin, say a few words about yourself for those who don't know you yet.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, Austin Harwood here. Been in the financial industry now close to a decade. My prior life, as I call it, was in IT. So Bay Area, Silicon Valley, that's what my dad's done. So I kind of followed in the footsteps after being the first one out of 62 people in my family to go to college. And that was great, but this ended up being a lot better for multiple reasons. And I don't know if I'll share a little bit about my story if you want, but yeah, one of the big things for me, how I got into this industry, if that's okay. If you mind,
go for it. Yeah, go for that. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So kind of how I got into the industry is, I don't know anyone, and I don't have any friends, frankly, that woke up, or played around in the sandbox at 5 years old and said, I want to be in the financial industry. I just don't have any that did that, and nor was I. But what was interesting was when I was working in tech, we were making good money and things like that, providing a good lifestyle for my family. It was just me and my wife at the time. We wanted to buy a house, wanted to start a family, and we were able to do all that, right? So it was great to do that, but I also realized that all my time was getting sucked up at work. So I was working, 70 plus hours a week, a couple hours of Bay Area traffic added on top of that per day, and never saw my wife and never saw my newborn baby. So obviously wanted a little more time to spend with them. What's the point of having resources if you don't actually get to spend it with the people that you want to spend it with? And another thing that was bothering me at the time was paying 47% in taxes.
Wow.
And I had met a CPA through the Dave Ramsey endorsed local provider ELP program. And so I had taken Dave Ramsey at a church, local church in my area. I took that class twice. I ended up being facilitator for that class twice. I was pretty passionate about it. Just kind of learning about finances and helping people get out of debt and budgeting, and really just kind of getting solid footing when it comes to their finances. A lot of people like me at that time, young, getting married, wanting to get a house, wanting to start a family, we don't really get a lot of advice. I mean, you can Google it, but just try Google financial planning and see all the stuff that comes up, right? It'll make your head spin. So for me, that was one of those things that I was fortunate. I think God always has a path. And when I look back, I go, wow, too many things lined up. I stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago when I came into this business, because I really do think that he places us on a path, and we obviously have to have enough awareness around to follow that path and walk down that path, because God can't drive a parked car. But fortunately, I was able to do that, get in contact with a mentor, a great mentor of mine now that's been in the financial industry over 20 years. His mentor has been in the financial industry for over 40 years. And so just been surrounding myself with great men of faith, great values, great morals, and obviously just learning the ropes here as we go. And now really one of my big passions is not only helping clients and financially educating people, but teaching others to do what I've done, right? Possible career change, things like that, and really taking control of their life. Finance is a big part of that. It's not everything, obviously, right? I always say faith is number one, family is number two, and obviously finance is number three, or business is number three, in that order. But that's kind of what brought me here. So just kind of developing a passion over time. Never thought I'd be in this industry, but it's been pretty well for my family, and I've been able to touch a lot of people's lives so far.
Yeah. So you answered pretty much question one already, but could you just kind of describe what is it that you do right now as a financial professional?
That I do. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. I got 5-year-olds and 8-year-olds, so they would have made a potty joke there.
Oh, but, I know. I stepped right into that one. No pun intended.
No pun intended. I like it. So yeah, what we do is we're big on financial literacy. As you guys probably know, they do not teach financial literacy in the school system. They do not teach financial literacy in college, at least college I went to, which was Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And I was even a business major and didn't really learn anything there. And so unless you come from a rich family, which I did not, you weren't really having a lot of talks and conversations around money and finances and planning and strategy and taxes and just all the stuff that you need really once you're an adult, right? Out in life, and you're earning money and you're earning income, but what do you do with it, and how do you navigate this world and plan and save and all that good stuff? So really, we educate a lot around that. We're with a non-captive agency, so I have 77 companies in the financial industry that I have access to through my platform. And what I like about that is the fact that we're kind of a one-stop shop. Right. We're unbiased. We can talk to people about multiple things, whether it's retirement planning, whether it's college planning. I work with a lot of young families. So whether it's college planning, whether it's, estate planning is another big one that I kind of see. Or if there are people, that we're talking about, maybe even in this podcast, kind of last third of their life, some planning for things like retirement or, maybe even like long-term care, like I said, with estate planning and some things that really need to be discussed, but that I kind of see as blind spots when I am meeting with those type of people. Okay, great. Lars, any initial questions?
I think we're going to get into a few more as we go. I mean, so I'd be curious your experience with church traditions and different things like that when it comes to financial literacy and these kind of things. You mentioned that you got introduced to Ramsey at your church. So yeah, I would be curious, kind of, was that the first time that finances were talked about? Do you feel since then that churches have gotten better at talking about finance, or worse, or it probably depends? But in your personal experience, was that like an anomaly, or is that something you feel like is getting stronger?
That was the first time I had seen, I had experienced church and finances being talked together, besides, passing the plate on Sunday, or doing your offering. Really, it was, it's one way. It's us, let's give back, or let's tithe, to the church, obviously support our community, so we can make some good works happen, but never really like, how would the church help me, or educate me or provide me some sort of resource for that education, that was never really brought up in my church experience, prior to 34 years old,
Right.
and the way that I wouldn't even really known about it, except that we were getting engaged and my parents bought us that class because you have to buy it. Right? It's not for free. So you have to buy it and then it's held at churches. So that's what they did. They bought me that class, me and my fiance at the time. And they said, look, you're about to join two households together. It probably makes sense to be on the same page about money. So thank goodness I have great parents,
Very wise.
still married over 45 years, and they're some of my role models, and I love them. And, they've always guided me in the right way as far as morals and values, and really been, big proponents of me being in church and raising my children in church. But that was kind of the first time that I'd ever seen those two things come together.
Okay. Wow. That's very interesting. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So let me follow up that with question number 2. In your experience so far, how many years then have you been in this industry so far?
So it's been about 8.5 now.
8.5. Okay. So in that
Mhm.
8.5 years, have you seen like a negative view of retirement getting in the way of people, Christians or pastors, from saving for retirement? And if so, like if that's not the number one obstacle, what have you found to be the number one obstacle?
Good question. I don't know that people have a negative view of retirement or something like that, like where, I always kind of make the joke, why would I want anything with tired in the name, but, people, when I talk to people about retirement, it's more so the way I view it is following passions and doing what you want to do, maybe than what you have to do. Now, of course, that takes planning and arrangement and strategy to get to that position, at least financially. But that's kind of what I see it. I see it as like this last part of life, like really where you're giving back, you're using your wisdom, your experience. They say that people, 50s, 60s plus, that's some of the happiest times of their life, besides being a child and having everything taken care of, because you have so much, you've learned so much, you literally do have so much to give that it just feels good, right? I mean, it's the same thing on Christmas or whatever. So it feels a lot better to give than to receive sometimes, But I think one of the biggest things, and probably most uncommon, that a lot of people don't really see as being a big issue, is that when we think about our future selves, they're a stranger to us, right? And so what I mean by that is, if you were to think about, okay, Jordan or Lars, 30 years down the road, you're probably going to have an optimistic picture about that, right? Because you're going to go, yeah, I expect good things to happen. I'm a faithful person. God will reward me, right? It's going to be great. Okay. But really, if I said, okay, who is that person? Do you know them intimately? Like, do you know exactly who they're going to be? You go, well, no, obviously I don't know what's going to happen the next 20, 30 years. So a bit of that is like, you're a stranger to yourself. This future version of yourself is a stranger. And if you think about it that way, you go, well, why would you be saving or planning for a stranger? Right. So a lot of people, because they're almost too optimistic about the future, maybe blind faith or what have you, they don't really take the initiative in their current times to really get those things in place, because they think, oh, well, that's a far way off. It's like when we're young, we think we're invincible. Like, well, car accident's not going to happen to me and I'm going to be good. It's like, well, you don't know. We're not promised tomorrow. Right. And so it really takes us kind of going, wow, that time's going to come sooner than later. I really need to start planning.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Well, the thought about in ministry, at least for me, there was always that appeal of going somewhere else. Maybe I'll have a different context and it'll be better, or I'll have a different job description, it'll be better. And that old adage of wherever you go, there you are. And we can say that with the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence kind of things. But I think that's incredibly helpful to reframe the saving for the future as kind of, it's hard to get yourself connected to that stranger because you are going to be different. And so acknowledging that, recognizing that that's a challenge allows us to kind of address that subconscious barrier we have to saving and good practices. So I appreciate that image, because I've never thought of it as I'm a stranger to my future self. But what are those movies? with I'm trying to remember which one it is. It's the time traveler one. I think Bruce
Back
Willis
to
is
the
in it or
Future.
something.
Oh, Bruce Willis. Oh,
Anyway, he comes
Looper or
back
something?
and yeah. I can't remember which one it was, but he doesn't even recognize himself. And well, Back to the
Right.
Future has some elements of that too. So
Right.
oh, Bruce Willis
those
is
are
the
helpful
one where
images.
he doesn't notice his older self. Is that the one where he's a kid and he meets his? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the one where he's like a executioner basically, and
Oh,
he
okay.
time travels back, and he's sent back to his younger self to be killed by his younger self. It's
Okay.
interesting.
Very
But
I think it's called
Terminator-esque.
Looper.
Terminator-esque.
I think it's called
yeah,
Looper. Yeah.
Looper,
Okay.
yes, Looper,
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that stranger to your future self might be a good way to. We could have a little article in there,
Yeah.
about pastors and their future selves. Would you recognize yourself now, Jordan? 10 years ago. I mean,
I don't know.
I've definitely had some changes. I feel like a stranger to my 10-year.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I think that's even how Netflix Money Explained has it's the series on Netflix, and they have a retirement episode, and I think that's even how they start that episode, is to look into the science behind that, of like imagining your future self and how it is so hard. But yeah, that's very cool. And so, and they have Teresa Ghilarducci, who I've referenced in my paper and in these questions I gave you beforehand. She's actually on that episode. And so in light of her research, Austin, and what she calls the American DIY retirement crisis, and your experience not only in being a student of Dave Ramsey, and teaching Dave Ramsey, but also now since giving seminars on perhaps why his advice might not be the greatest or best. Is Christian financial advice like Ramsey's contributing to what Ghilarducci calls the American DIY retirement crisis? Do you think so?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I think it's a lot more factors than that. But people do become very. My experience has been people become very passionate, and I'm speaking of myself as well, when following the Dave Ramsey program.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's literally, I remember conversations in my house. I'm talking to my parents, I'm talking to friends. I go, well, Dave says, and they go, who's this Dave guy? I go, oh, Dave Ramsey. It's a class I took at church. But yeah, I think like that they just become so like people want to follow hope. You know what I mean? They want to follow a hope and a future. And I think Dave, here's what I will say. He's probably the best at getting people on track. Right? That's kind of been my experience.
Yeah.
Budgeting, getting out of debt, just really like a good foundation where you're living within your means, you're not overspending. And that's what I would say he's the best at. And that's what served us. I mean, we paid off 30 grand of debt in 6 months. By utilizing some of those strategies that he had. I'd never done a budget before, but now I do a budget every month with my wife, and it takes a lot. It's a lot quicker now than it was, not many years ago. But getting out of debt, paying yourself first. There's a book called The Richest Man in Babylon, and it talks about that you need to pay yourself first, right? We talk about tithing, right, in church. And so, making sure, hey, yeah, the Comcast bill might be there, the Xfinity bill might be there, your car payment might be there, the rent might be there, right? But you're going to get to the end of the month or the end of the year, and what have you paid yourself, right? And oftentimes people pay everyone else, even though you're earning the money, right? You're making the income, you're earning the money for your family or what it is, and you're taking the time to pay everyone else, and you really have left yourself out. And I think that's one of the things that actually adds to this problem, is that people are fine working 40, 50, 60 hours of their life every week to basically pay for everybody else's stuff instead of their own, right? And their own responsibility. But on the bad side of things, where I'd say maybe the advice isn't the best, is he's very adamant about certain vehicles, hey, you need growth stock mutual funds, that do 10 to 12%, right? You know what I mean? And by the way, I haven't really found too many of those. because when you take account for fees and things like that, and we could get into that, if we want to, it's like, I mean, the market needs to be doing 11.5 to 13.5 on average, right? And it just doesn't do that. It just doesn't really do that. And so, not looking at all the vehicles, not looking at all your options, dare I say, one of the critiques of Christians sometimes is that they're closed-minded, right? They're not open-minded. They're stuck in their ways, and it's my way or the highway. You see some people, they're very evangelical, and that's fine, right? But that's where I feel like Dave Ramsey appeals to most. It's like, oh yes, I'm going to get one track, and I'm only going to talk about this one thing. And it's like, well, let me let you know, if you were on the wrong track, would you want to know sooner or later?
Yeah.
Right? You'd probably want to know sooner, right? And so that's where I feel, working in an industry where you can actually give options to people want to know their options, right? I mean, if you went to a car lot and you said, hey, I'm looking for a car, and they go, okay, we got this car or this car or this car, and it's all the same car, you would leave the lot. You'd go, wow, I test drive one of these cars. I know what all these cars are on the lot. Right? But what about a car lot that says, hey, I got a truck, I got an SUV, I got this little car, I got an electric car, I got, like, what do you want? What are your needs? What floats your boat? Where are you looking to go with this car, right? Are you going to the mountains, or you're just daily commuting, 10, 20 miles, right? Maybe you need an electric car. I don't know. Right? So really, I think it's sometimes detrimental when we make blanket statements or advice for every single person when we don't really understand their situation.
Okay. Lars, any follow-up to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's where we're on the same page with that. I think the difficulty I have whenever I sit with financial advisors or people who are in the financial industry is that, well, to the average person, and I may not be the average person because I have an accounting background and stuff, but to the average person, a lot of these vehicles sound the same. And so, we are kind of saying, oh, you need a retirement. You need to be saving. You need to not be using debt. There's a lot of advice that's very similar when it sounds that way. So I guess what I'm curious about, how do you go about that idea of tailoring to a specific situation? Is and I guess I would say, is that mostly taking into consideration the season of life, like their age, or is it more taking into consideration kind of like where you live, or your goals? So we've had some different conversations on this podcast, and I'd be curious what your strategy is for tailoring financial planning for the individual.
Yeah, I think it's goals. I think it's also ideologies, like, how do you feel about certain topics? Okay, so case in point, last year, inflation was going crazy, right? So you had money in a savings account. As Dave says, you should have, 3-6 months saved for an emergency fund. That's what he would call a fully funded emergency fund, right? Baby step 3. And that money was dead money, right? Because you were making 0.01% in your savings account, and inflation was at 9%, and you were -9 for the year on that cash, right? Now, it was great. You had the cash there. So I guess if there was an emergency, you could go grab it, but you didn't really even keep up your purchasing power. You lost your purchasing power last year, right? And it'd be same things kind of even with employment sometimes. It's like, well, did most people get a 7 to 8 to 9% raise last year? No, they didn't. So as a matter of fact, they made less money working last year, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy. Taxes would be another one. What's your feeling on taxes, right? Do you feel like taxes are high right now? Do you feel like they're low? We could ask what your feeling is, and then we could look at the facts, right? And the facts are that taxes are some of the lowest rates they've been in the history of this country right now, even though some people feel like, wow, I pay way too many taxes. I mean, we're here in California. We pay a lot of taxes, right? We're kind of crazy that way. But, where do you think they're going to go in the future? Do you think with things that are severely underfunded, like Social Security and Medicare, and the government just hit their $31 trillion debt ceiling, and they're, having conversations around that, you think that taxes are going to go a lot lower when we're paying for wars and all that stuff? Or do you think it's possible and probable that things are going to get a lot higher to pay for a lot of these programs? So I think it's ideologies. I think it's, maybe where you're at in life. And I think that would relate to maybe risk tolerance. And then I think it definitely comes down to, what are your goals, right? Some people, as we know, want to get by, and some people want to get ahead. So what is it that you want to try and do? And then let's go to work on kind of building that picture and seeing what might fit, how that is for you, how you feel when it comes to some of these topics that I typically talk about with clients.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So let's talk about one particular vehicle that you often talk to clients about, and that's the IUL, Index Universal Life, for those who don't know the acronym. How do IULs help us understand exactly what they are and can do? Because at least when I tried to be a financial professional in 2020 during the pandemic and in first part of 2021, most of the time I would mention this product. People were like, I have no idea what that is. There was the obstacle of that unfamiliarity, and therefore they would reject it. So help us understand what those are, because it really seems like it is kind of hard to understand, and many hadn't even heard of them before.
Yeah, I still get that even today, and pretty much they've been around almost as long as 401ks, but a lot of people are still not very familiar with them. I think partially that's typically because maybe they've been reserved for more affluent clients, and now what we're seeing is they're kind of Wall Street to Main Street type thing, where they are becoming more available for people. Okay. One of the most popular products in the marketplace, I would say, in the financial marketplace right now. But a little bit about what they are. So IUL stands for Index Universal Life. At its core, it is a life insurance policy with some unique features and benefits to that. Some of that being the indexed portion of Index Universal Life. What indexed means is that you will actually not invest directly into the market, but you will basically mirror a market index performance. So the easiest way that I can have people understand is, hey, if the market goes up, you make gains, but if the market goes down, you take a zero. In most cases, it could be 0 to 1%. It depends on whatever they call the floor is, but you would basically get a guarantee. That guarantee could be 0 or all the way to 1%. So market goes down 10%, you're making 0. You're basically money is protected. You're safe. You're kind of locking in these gains, not giving up the gains that you've made in the past. And then when the market takes off again or recovers, then you're going to participate in those gains, either all or most of those gains. So that's kind of a unique engine feature, if you will, built in on how actually it grows money inside. Yes, it is wrapped in a life insurance, and there's also some other benefits like living benefits, long-term care, things like that kind of double up as that life insurance. So people use it whether they get sick, whether they pass away, or whether they live too long. So it's kind of a pocket knife or like a Swiss Army knife of financial services, if you will, because it kind of depends on what tool you want to use that's in there. It's very multifaceted that way. But some unique advantages of life insurance as a whole, and I'm talking about permanent life insurance, which IUL is not the only kind. It's just kind of like the iPhone 14 version of permanent life insurance, is that you can grow your money inside tax deferred. You can basically use your money on a tax-free basis through either withdrawals or loans. And then you can pass that on to a beneficiary, whoever that is, charity, church, your kids, what have you, also tax-free. So it is a bit of a triple threat when it comes to taxes and tax advantages. But that's kind of what a lot of people are looking at it as. I don't know about a 401k comparable, but a lot of people are looking at least as a portion of their portfolio, mainly to get them higher rates of return than like bonds, I would say. It's not a direct, market competitor with like stocks, right? Because those are the most aggressive. So probably not going to be making as much as just being in a single share of a stock. But consistent rates of return is what people look for, maybe in that, 6 to 10% range, I'd say. So outperforming in bonds and things like that, plus getting those tax advantages as well. Some unique features too that you can use the money, like working capital and stuff like that. But if you want me to get into that, we can talk about that in a bit too.
Okay, great. I think we'll want to. Lars, follow up, man. Do you got anything?
Yeah. So we talked about fees earlier with mutual funds and investing and stuff like that. Help me understand fee structures with the indexed universal life, and how that works. How do we stay ahead of inflation, as you brought up inflation, when there are fees, and this is life insurance and it's not just an investment? Because I think sometimes it's marketed as you're going to get this guaranteed rate with no risk. And well, if we have inflation of 9%, that guaranteed rate, even if that guaranteed rate is 10%, we didn't make inflation. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, help me understand that, because the index funds are doing well, but they don't necessarily do as well as you just mentioned. They're not quite as competitive. They're more safe.
So let me be clear. I wasn't referring to index funds, which is a mutual fund. So that is a market investment. Okay. So that you're directly playing in a market index, S&P 500, Dow Jones, NASDAQ, what have you. It's an indexed strategy within the life insurance component. So that's what gives you that guarantee of no direct market downside to your money. Okay, while also capturing the upside, because essentially it works like profit sharing. And then I'm going to talk about the fee structure. So it'll work like profit sharing in the sense of this. And I work for a company that used to have profit sharing in my tech career. And so if we had a banner year, we had an excellent year and the company was doing well, and we were making great profits that year, they shared in those profits with some of the employees, at least the key employees, right? And so it would work the same way. Hey, if the indexes that we're tracking have a great year, we're sharing in the profits with the policy holders, right? But we'll basically take on the risk for you, where you don't have to directly invest yourself, right? So you kind of, what is insurance for? It's really a transference of risk, right? I mean, car insurance, you're transferring the risk. If your car gets in an accident, that the insurance company will make you whole. With your homeowners, you're transferring the risk. If something happens to your home, the insurance company will make you whole. Here, you're just transferring the risk that if something happens to the market or your money, they will make you whole. Right. And that's basically what they're doing. As far as a fee structure, it works inversely to like how a typical IRA or 401k, let's say, would work. And what I mean by that is that typically you'll see higher fees like per dollar amount in typically the first 5 to 10 years in a lot of these IUL policies, but drop off significantly after that. Whereas with a 401k or IRA or something of that nature, you're going to have kind of a low comparison dollar amount at the beginning, and then you're going to be paying much higher in the end. And so let me just try and walk you through an example, right? Like, let's just say, for example, I'm just going to use hypothetical numbers here. Someone puts 20 grand into an IUL, they could be paying, I don't know, $3,500 of that 20 grand that very first year towards policy administration fees, right? Expense charges, right? Things of that nature, okay? Cost of insurance, right? Et cetera, et cetera. If you were to put 20 grand in a 401k, and let's say you're at 1%, which is pretty average in a 401k, you're going to pay $200, right? In that plan. But what is the goal if we're looking at, as far as growing money in both of those vehicles? The goal is to accumulate wealth. So as you accumulate wealth in the IUL structure, which is, once again, grows tax deferred, you can utilize it tax-free, right, through withdrawals and loans, okay? So you are paying less towards the end of that program, whereas in a 401k, your goal is also to grow that wealth. But what is 1% of, let's say, $1 million? Well, now, right, you're paying what, $10,000 just for that 1 year in fees. So once again, it's inverse of how typical retirement plans, individuals or employer sponsored, would work as far as a fee structure. Is that clear?
Yeah. So I would just, so that I'm clear, because I made the mistake about the index. So the index then is a set of investments that they're doing. It's not tied to the big ones that we would think of as index, or or is it sometimes? It depends on the policy, essentially.
It does. Yeah, it depends on the company and it depends on the policy, right? So every company makes a product. It's like saying, well, my Toyota Camry can do this, but can your Honda Accord do that? Well, they're both cars, they're both mid-sized sedans, but one might have a little different features than the other one, right? And so depending on the company, depending on the policy, that will determine the indexes you have access to track or benchmark. And that's what's going to give you that upside potential.
Okay. So one more
go for it.
Clarification
Please.
for me, because I'm not as familiar as Jordan is with the IULs. I'm just learning about them through him, actually. So as the policy grows, and with life insurance, often as you get more closer to your death, sometimes the premium goes up. So how does that play into the fee structure that you just described? It's kind of an inverse. Well, what if my premium is so costly that I can't afford the payment when I actually am going to need it? So how does that work?
That's fair. And this is where it's actually funny. Dave and the way that these work are actually in alignment here. He doesn't know that because he doesn't really understand it, but this is actually where we are in alignment. And Dave's whole methodology is you want to self-insure, you want to self-insure, you want to self-insure. So you should just have a term policy because, of course, you're going to be making millions and millions of dollars in your retirement plans. Plus, you're going to pay off your house. Plus, your kids aren't going to need you, right? Because everyone's out of the house and independent at 18. Yeah, right. Okay. But that's the ideology, right? So you don't need life insurance because no one's relying on your income, right? So you have no income replacement need. And so you're self-insured, right? If something happens to you and you pass away, well, you just give the house to your spouse, or, you pass that down to your kids. By the way, make sure you have a trust, right? So you can do that without paying 20, 40% to the government while you do that, right? But, things like that, that's his ideology. It's the same thing here. So what ideally you want is, yes, you might have a life insurance death benefit, which is the life insurance portion, right, that you are paying for. But ultimately, as these policy values grow inside, you're paying less and less and less for the life insurance. So there's less risk to the company, meaning less cost to the policyholder. Right. So it's funny how we're in alignment there. He just doesn't really know the intricacies of how it works. So he makes very blanket statements. I've listened to his podcasts and things like that, where it's just like, sometimes I just kind of hit my head like this. I go, wow, he's not even talking about the same product, right? He's talking about an older version, like something called a variable universal life or a whole life product or something like that. That's why I said IUL is kind of like the iPhone 14 version of these permanent type products.
Okay. So that's helpful clarification. And I actually probably should listen to Ramsey so that I know what he's saying too. But I'm not either person. I did get introduced to a guy recently by the name of Nelson Nash. Have you ever heard of? He has a book, Becoming Your Own Banker or something.
Becoming Your Own Banker, yeah.
Yeah, I'd be curious if you're familiar with it. Your thoughts on that, and if there's similarity. My quick initial inquiry is that he's basing it on that older model, but I could be wrong.
He is. So when he was writing that book, then it was whole life was the widespread used vehicle to do that. So one advantage of whole life is it's not tied to anything related to the market, right? You're just going to earn basically a dividend, which usually is a fixed rate, right? Depending on the profitability of that company. So in the neighborhood, historically, it's going to be somewhere in 2 to 4%, right? 2 to 4%. So the theory is that if I'm always earning 2 to 4%, I'm never at risk of what the market does, up, down, sideways, it doesn't matter, but I'm always making 2 to 4%, then basically I can eventually become my own bank where I can use those funds inside. I can essentially loan them to myself, right? Because I know I'm always making the 2 to 4%. The challenge in my experience that I've seen in reviewing policies like this from clients, my current clients or past clients, or people that didn't even become my clients, right? That just had these vehicles and decided to stay with them, was that the loan fees were actually more than what you would gain. So for an example, let's say I've historically been making 3% in my dividends in my whole life policy, but yet they're going to charge me 7 or 8% to use my own money. Well, you're paying then a net loss of what, like 5, right? 4 to 5%. So is that really going to draw down if you're only utilizing that on a short-term basis, a year or two? Probably not, right? Because we pay that for cars, right? Auto loans, mortgages now are, 6, 7%. So yeah, you can do that. But in an IUL, right, the theory is it's very low to borrow your money. Sometimes it's literally zero. Like after the first 10 years in a lot of these policies, you can do what's called a wash loan, where they will charge you maybe 2% and they will credit you 2% at the end of the year on the loaned amount. And so it's 0% to use your own money, right? Or in some of these, they'll charge you, let's say 4%, but then you can earn whatever the index earns. So if that index earns you 7 that year, now you have positive arbitrage. So you're paying yourself to use your own money, which is essentially the whole method of think like a banker or become your own bank, right? Because that's what banks do. They make money based on the circulation of money, right? Money sitting there doesn't do anything, right, for them. So they take it in, they pay us their little 1% or 0.01 or 0.02, and then they lend it out for credit cards at 25%, right? Or mortgages at 7%, or auto loans at 7%, or student loans or what have you. So it's that circulation of money and always earning more than they're paying out, right? And that's kind of the whole model of banking. And you just apply that to yourself here, utilizing these same vehicles.
Okay. Awesome.
Thanks. That was good. Good explanation.
You're welcome.
So the next follow-up to that is for the typical like pastor in Churches of Christ, where they may or may not have opted out of Social Security, they earn a low salary, they might have student loans. The typical Church of Christ pastor works for a church that might be over 100 people.
Sure.
And so would IULs be a good vehicle to acquire for them? And if so, how?
Yeah. Once again, I don't want to be like Dan Ramsey and make a blanket statement here, right, about everyone. But I would say, is it worth looking into at least? Yeah, probably. And for a multitude of reasons, right? I mean, we talked about it. You pretty much have tax-free accumulation. You have that tax-free access. In a lot of these policies, you're not restricted to a lot of the qualified plan rules. And by that, I mean your typical employer and retirement or like an IRA or something like that. So you can access this money sooner than, let's say, 59 and a half, right? Or you don't have a forced distribution, like a required minimum distribution. So you can leave the money growing in there if you actually don't need it later in life beyond 73 this tax year that we're talking in. You can treat it like that personal bank. So yeah, although incomes might be lower, maybe they have parsonage, maybe they don't, right? Maybe they want to purchase their own property. Well, a vehicle like this is actually going to lead you a little more flexibility to do that, because there's no age restrictions or penalties or taxes associated with trying to do something like that. So using this maybe as a foundational tool, not a silver bullet by any means, okay? I don't think there is one perfect product in the financial industry, to be honest. But using this as maybe a foundational vehicle so that you can get further ahead or take these other steps in building wealth, accumulating assets, things of that nature over the time that you're working or serving in the church, so that you're good once that time comes where you're not maybe doing that anymore. I think it could be good. I also think I'm hard pressed to find people that think taxes are going to get a lot lower going into the future. And, when you don't have to take things like the market loss, I mean, 2021 was great, man. We made 27% in the market, if we're just talking S&P, but we were down 20% last year, right? So if I had 100 grand and I made 27, I'm at 127, right? But now I just lost 20% of not my 100, of my 127, right? So guess what? Now I've just lost almost 26. So now I'm basically broken even, right? Even though I made 27 the first year and I only lost 20 the second year, right? And so people, without having to take market loss, without having to be at bay of taxes on the rise, and so there's less for you and more for the government, usually people can make that work a little better in their favor.
Okay. Yeah, and what last year was the largest market loss since 2008, right?
Yeah, it was pretty
that's what I heard.
there. I mean, it was just shy of 20. It was like 19.2 or something, right? But yeah, basically 20% bear market, right?
Okay, right. Yeah, Lars, you had some.
Yeah, well, so we were talking about tailoring these things. So we'll take my experience as I'm was a pastor up until 2020 and actually making better money than I was making at previous positions. They were giving me a stipend for health insurance and different things. They were trying to start thinking about benefits package that was more holistic, not just relying on my wife working at the school district and providing that stuff. So I, at the time, was contributing to my IRA, and we were talking about a match. Right. And, if I was to keep contributing to my retirement, I'd get a match. And at my current employment at the university, they match. Actually, it ends up being where if I do 4%, they will do they do 2% automatically, whether I contribute or not. And then if I do 4%, they'll do an additional up to 4% match. So I get 10% of my income to my IRA. Nice. Well, it's 403B actually. 403B, but yeah, so with my 403B, I'm getting my 10% match. Ramsey would say, get your full employer match, then do your own things, do other Roth things. IRA, so for you, is that where the IUL fit in after I'm maxing out my employer's match, or is this in lieu of that? Because I know serving down there in Glendale, I didn't have anything addition to the 2 or 3% that I was going to be putting away that they were going to match. So that's, I guess, where I'm wondering, is this like Ramsey's Roth IRAs and other stuff that he's saying above the employer's match, or is this in lieu of that?
Yeah. It's hard, right? If you're going to put in 4, and even if they're going to give you 2, it's hard to beat a 50% gain right off the bat, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely advise people, like, if you're getting a match at an employer plan, put in up to the match, right? I mean, it's free money, quote unquote, free money. You're gonna have to pay taxes on it later, but even if taxes go to 40%, hey, you still made 10, right? In that 50% example. So, I'm always encouraging people to at least get that match. But what I found, and this might be surprising, right? Like a 6% match is pretty good. That's not the typical workplace match right now, right? So it might be 2%. At my tech job, it was 1%. Right. So I was trying to do the best I could, save 10%, and they were matching me 1. You know what I mean? So it's like, could I have done something else with that 9? Maybe. I wasn't educated on anything else, right? Because how many options do you have at your workplace retirement plan? This or this, right? It's like, that's all you have, right? They're not giving you any other options. So it's take it or leave it. But yeah, I definitely would get that. And then I would look at utilizing this in conjunction with, I don't know about in lieu of, I would probably say in conjunction with, and that's at least how most of my clients are utilizing it, because they say one of the best ways to build wealth is diversify, right? So if you have something, and by the way, a lot of people, when they do that match, Lars, just so we're clear, they give that to the traditional side. Okay, whether you're putting towards the traditional side or the Roth side. Okay, and the reason that a lot of corporations or organizations do that is the tax advantage to do it that way, right? They actually get to write that off. Okay, so they're writing it off. They're basically putting the tax burden on you. That's fine. You're getting free money, right? But they're shifting the tax burden to the participant away from the organization. Okay, that's essentially what they're doing. Now, they call it a benefit, and it is some money that's going to be added there and potentially be able to compound and things like that. But even if we look at last year, people were getting matches and it was all gone. They were putting money in and it was all gone, right? So what do you do when you've put money in a year and you didn't get a 20% match and you were down 20% in your portfolio? You see what I'm saying? So there's some give and take. That's why I said maybe in conjunction of, or finding that happy medium where, do I need all the match or can I get a majority of the match? And then, this is my fixed amount that I have discretionary to save, maybe my 10% or whatever. So maybe I put a majority over there and I put a little over here. But I think as, once again, a foundational tool, right, IUL can benefit a lot of people because of that flexibility, right? And be able to utilize it in so many different manners that you can't, frankly, with a 403B, 401k, deferred comp, IRA, things like that.
So help us get a little bit of a comparison here. Let's say I'm making $50,000. I was making a little bit more than that, but it was about taxable income ended up being about 50,000 there. I had a few benefits things, but for the most part, making 50,000, I'm contributing 2%. At that time, I was trying to contribute about 2 to 3% to my traditional 401k or 403b. Now I'm looking at probably got another $250 a month, maybe. Is this something? Is that amount what we're looking at with an IUL for someone in their early 30s? Give us that picture, or is there going to be a higher, savings requirement needed for something like this?
That's a great question, because I think this is where a lot of I've never heard of that comes from, is that you look at like Pacific Life, I think is the number one in market share right now. I just had a meeting with my regional rep out here, and he said the average annual contribution to a Pacific Life IUL is $62,000 a year, more than the salary you just talked about, right? Yeah. So I think that a lot of these vehicles had been utilized for higher net worth individuals, highly compensated employees, executive level, C-level people, even within corporation. That's a whole nother topic we could get on there, right? How corporations and banks even utilize this stuff. But that's where we're seeing this kind of come down into the mainstream and actually being able to use. I helped someone set up a plan like this, saving $50 to $70 a month for one of her kids, because she's going to utilize it as a college fund in lieu of like a 529 even, right? Because with a 529, yet she ideally wants her kid to go to college, but the kid's one. She doesn't know what he's going to do in another 17 years, right? And so if he doesn't go there, she's kind of stuck with that money in that box. They just came out with something saying that, now you can actually start funneling that to a Roth IRA, but there's once again lifetime limitations on that. Right. You have to have earned income to even do a Roth IRA. So once again, you have these limitations of parameters that you have to go with. So even people as low as $100, $200, $300 a month. And what really is going to make a difference there, Lars, is the design of the policy. Okay. That is very, very important. Okay. It's like a relationship between you and your financial professional, because obviously you don't want to pay for just life insurance, right? You actually want this to grow. You want this to work for you. You want to be able to leverage the cash value inside. You want to get some of these benefits. And so the best way to do that in actuality is the least amount of life insurance that you can get for the most amount of money you're trying to put in there legally. And the reason I say legally is because there's tax codes that actually regulate these things. You can't just dump some unabsorbent amount of money into these. You still have to qualify for them, right? And things like that. They'll look at a financial side, they'll look at a health side. You have to qualify for a couple things in these. But to answer your question simply of, is 250 enough? I would ask the question, what are you trying to do with the 250? What are your goals, right? Because if you say, is 250 enough to save, but I have a dream of buying $1 million house, the answer is no. Right? But if you say, is 250 enough to save because this is all I have to save right now, and saving something is better than saving nothing, I would say yes. Right? So once again, it's back to, what is that person's financial picture, income, debt, right? Expenses, discretionary saving, and then what are also their needs? A lot of young pastors, they're married, right? They have kids. So, I mean, if you want to get into a moral maybe talk of protecting your family and making sure that they're still taken care of after you're gone, I think a lot of Christians would agree, yeah, I would want that situation to happen if I had the choice, if I had the option. I would want to make sure my spouse doesn't have to worry, right? She or he's already going to be emotionally suffering. They don't want to add financial stress on top of that. What's the number one reason for divorce? Financial stress in the household. So I think morally and ethically, we'd be doing some good works here as well if people had some of these things that could help them both currently and beyond.
Okay, great. Now, getting back to criticisms of this product, of this vehicle.
Sure.
Dave Ramsey and even the Wall Street Journal is not a big fan of Index Universal Life. They seem very opposed to them. Why is that? And is their criticism valid?
Yeah, I think they share the same criticisms I actually share about the product being used in the marketplace, which is you have to use it correctly. Okay. And what I mean by that is that there are, let's just say green people that come into the industry. I was in tech. Okay. I was not a financial guru. I studied business and marketing, but I did not, I wasn't accounting like Lars, I wasn't studying finance or economics or anything. Right. But so depending on someone's training, maybe when they get into the industry, right, they have a license, obviously, to be able to do these things. You do need to be licensed, fingerprinted, background check, that whole thing. So there's regulations in this industry. You can't just be willy-nilly. But I think depending on their training or lack thereof, maybe they're just a little too green. They don't know how to design these correctly. They don't know how to set them up for the client. Maybe they're not even taking the time to really understand the client situation, needs, dreams, goals, things of that nature. So, I share in those same critiques and criticisms that they are not great if you don't plan on keeping these long term, right? If you plan on using this for a year or two, there's other things you should be doing out there. You should not be doing this product, right? And I'll just say that right out front. Like, you should not. This is a long-term vehicle. This is something you're using foundationally to further your asset accumulation, leave a legacy, protect yourself, your family, living benefits, get some tax advantages along the way, have less restrictions as far as your age restrictions and how you can use the funds. But if you're planning on keeping it 3 years, don't do this. Don't use this vehicle, right? You can use a bank account. You can do an IRA, right? If you have working income, right? Things like that. So you can do some of these other things, right? It is a bit of a niche product in that way, but it's the poorly designed policies that have really, frankly, too many fees for what you're putting in. And there's bad apples in every industry, right? And so I think negativity, as we look at the world, gets more press than positivity. It's like what sells? Pandemic sells, fear sells, right? Stay in your house. Everyone should wear a mask, right? Like, that's what sells. But is that necessarily the truth? As we come to find out, maybe not, right? So I'm just saying that I think negativity is heard louder than positivity. I think people, like I said, canceling these things and just frankly, let's call it what it is, wasting money, right? In my opinion, wasting money. I wouldn't recommend it. I don't want to waste money. I wouldn't want you to waste your money. We work hard for our incomes. We work hard for our families, right? We want to make sure that money works hard for us. So I would say, the big critiques out there that I hear that I agree with is, the fees are high. Well, that's only if you're planning on doing something short term, which you shouldn't be considering doing it if you're going to get into a product like this. And right, people canceling and the fees were too high. Well, that's because you didn't use it the way it's intended. So let me ask you a question. If I build you a car and you drive around the car until it's all out of oil and gas and then the engine blows up, is that the manufacturer of the car's fault?
Obviously
probably not.
No.
You probably should have put some gas in the car, check the oil every once in a while, right? And so I don't want to say that advisors, can be fully for blame for this. I mean, I think it's a bit of a relationship, right? It's me understanding you. It's me making sure I design things correctly for you and what you want and what your needs are, not just putting you once again, blanket statement. Everyone should have this. It's all good for everyone, right? It's going to depend on that person's situation.
And it depends on the company that you get the policy from as well.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Because even with that, I've seen lower cost structures, initially and long-term. So working with someone that is non-captive, shall we say, there are companies out there that are captive and they just do their own products, right? And it's take it or leave it. It's like, I'll just say Wells Fargo, like I bank at Wells Fargo, but if I go into Wells Fargo and I say, hey, I want a checking or savings, they're going to give me a Wells Fargo checking or savings. They're not going to tell me B of A has a better deal or go talk to Chase because they're giving you a $200 signing bonus, right? They're just not going to do that, right? Because they're just don't sell those products, right? It's only proprietary for them. So working with someone that's non-captive that actually can show you your options and is educated on this stuff, then definitely more beneficial for you.
Any follow-up to that, Lars?
Well, let's keep going.
Okay, let's keep going then. Question 6.
Awesome.
All right, so you had mentioned businesses and banks taking advantage of life insurance and what it does for them to grow their assets. Why do they utilize IULs, and what can churches and Christian organizations and even individuals learn from them about it and possibly benefit from them based upon their example?
Okay, so let me break down each of those,
Sure.
and then we'll talk about how maybe churches and or pastors can use this to their advantage as well, utilizing these kind of same strategies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So number one, when we look at banks, I already said it, banks are in the business of making money,
Mm-hmm.
right? And banks also have to have a certain amount of money in reserves, right? In assets and things like that. You probably heard the FDIC and all that good stuff. When we go to the little bank, we see the little plaque there. But what the banks do is we feel good about the FDIC because we're protected up to 250,000, right? If that bank goes under, if that financial institution goes under. But what the banks do is they are not required to have a huge amount in reserves. Okay, so literally they can lend out, depending on the bank, 1 to 10, 1 to 20, and beyond, right? As far as what they have in reserves versus what they can lend out. So essentially printing money, right? Creating it out of thin air. I mean, look what the government did over the last 3 years, right? We're kind of seeing it happen in our own lives, okay? But when you look at, let's say, insurance companies, they actually are required to have a certain amount in reserves. Could be 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, even upwards of 10 to 1 money in reserves versus what their obligations are going to be. So insurance institutions are some of the most conservative, fiscally conservative, financially conservative, and stable institutions in the world, right? You think about how many banks went under even in the 2008 crisis, how many insurance companies went under? Like hardly any, if any, right? And that was because they had these monies in reserve. They've survived Great Depressions, right? They've survived world wars, things of that nature, and they're still standing, right? A lot of the companies I work with been around over 100 plus years, right? But the banks understand that they can grow their money tax-free. They understand that there's no direct downside market risk. They understand that they can utilize this for their own working capital, right? And they understand that they can even be a beneficiary. They can be an owner, a payer, a beneficiary. Obviously, if I asked you, well, when's B of A going to die? You wouldn't say, oh, they're a bank, they're not going to die, right? But why does Bank of America have $24 billion in life insurance assets? Right? You can go look it up, banks and life insurance, just Google it, right? And you'll see Bank of America has 24 billion in life insurance assets. So why do they do that if the bank's not going to die? It's because of the tier one asset, what it's called, that's the safety that's within that asset, right? So this the big safety and reliance piece, because they're so highly leveraged, these banks are so highly leveraged, that's why they use this, because it's a core measure of their financial strength. On the business side of things, right, the way that they use it is they'll use it for, let's say, highly compensated employees, a lot of times executives or C-level. So you can do what's called discretionary plans. See, a 401k or something like that is what's called non-discretionary. So if you offer it to one, you have to offer it to all. Okay, but when you have a highly compensated employee, you can say, hey, you make this company $1 million a year. We don't really want to lose you. Let me put together this nice golden handcuff package for you, right? And you can add some things in there like they did with Jim Harbaugh, right? When he went to the University of Michigan, a split dollar agreement and a life insurance. They actually utilized IUL to do that. And then some of the other, collegiate universities started catching on board. They go, wow, that's nice. We can recoup our investment, after 5 to 7 to 10 years. And it's this huge golden handcuff benefit where if they leave, we literally get all the money back, right? So we're going to commit them to their contract. But if they leave, everyone's made whole. We get our money back that we spent, and then they get to walk with the rest of it, right? The surplus. And so we're kind of seeing things like that.
Interesting.
What I see for churches and pastors is, in churches, if they were, and, at the sake of sounding morbid, okay, if they were to take out some of these things maybe on their pastors, right? If you have a very engaging pastor, the congregation, right, is pulled to that, okay? So you would want to retain that pastor if that's what's bringing in the attendance, okay? Versus maybe someone's dull and they don't have a high congregation amounts, right? Or attendance. Okay. So if it was something like that, maybe the church could insure the pastor. They could be the owner. They could be the beneficiary. Heaven forbid something happened to that pastor, right? The church could actually recoup that money to what? To keep church operations going, to find a new pastor, right? To hire and bring on and retain, right? And so it's once again, at the sake of sounding morbid, it's how do we actually make sure our churches and our church community continues to grow, right? That we're actually providing benefit and value to the leadership in the church, the pastors, right? And things of that nature. And then essentially pastors can have this for themselves, right? Where they know that their family's taken care of and they get to utilize some of these benefits. The church can even use the money while the pastor's alive as working capital, right? For other projects or charities or things that they want to get involved in to make a bigger impact, right? So it kind of uses as a working capital for the churches, just like we see a lot of the banks doing. And then it can be that key person arrangement like we see a lot of the businesses doing, right? It just kind of depends on maybe the discretionary funds, once again, that's coming in from the congregation and how they wish to utilize and be a steward over those funds.
All right. Okay. So you had mentioned Pack Life. Correct me if I'm wrong. So at one point, I thought it was mentioned somewhere. I found 52 insurance carriers currently selling IULs, which Pack Life seems to have the biggest share of the current market. I think at like 19%. Is that sound accurate to you?
That sounds about right. It might be a little more on the carriers now, and it might be slightly less on the percentage, but that sounds about right. That's the ballpark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was probably a year or two old numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so does that lend credence to this vehicle when there's seems to be a lot of detractors, especially those like Ramsey who have a large following and listen to what he says?
I mean, I think more companies are trying to offer it because they see the value that there is in the marketplace.
Yeah.
So they obviously, you could look at it selfishly, corporation wise, they don't want to miss out on dollars, right? And profitabilities and things like that. But also you have to design a good product, right? I mean, there's a lot of cars in the marketplace, but not everyone buys all the cars, right? They buy a certain amount of cars, right? Because they place value on that certain type of vehicle, right? I mean, Tesla, we'll just use as an example, right? With probably the number one electric car, right? And they just dropped their prices on things like that. Well, everywhere I drive, I happen to see a lot of Teslas, right? Because obviously people must place value on a Tesla, so they're going to do okay. If people place value on a product like this, and by the way, the marketplace determines that. No one has a gun to anyone's head saying you need to buy this thing, right? This XYZ thing, right? It's the value in the marketplace that you're bringing that people see, perceive value or real value, right? And they're willing to invest in these products or get into these products or put funds into these products. But as I mentioned before, the average Pacific Life policy is $62,000 annually, right? I think the last statistics I had heard is they insure over half of the Fortune 500 CEOs, right? With their Pacific Life IUL products, right? So once again, that's kind of lending way to, oh, this is reserved for wealthy people and things like that. But I also think, well, I mean, if you look at what wealthy people are doing, the reason sometimes people are wealthy is because of the way they think and their decision-making abilities and processes, right? And if you think like a lot of poor people, you probably will also be poor. And I'm not making any judgments here or accusing anyone of anything, but a lot of this stuff is in how we think. Some people see something and they think that sounds too good to be true. Other people see something and say, that sounds like a great opportunity, right? So it's just in how are you approaching your world view, right? And these things. But I think it does lend some credence to these things increasing in popularity. You could call it a hot product, you can call it whatever you want, but it's the marketplace that's determining that.
Yeah.
It's not the marketing of a company. It's the marketplace determining whether this is a value or not.
Yeah, and according to LIMRA, which stands for Life Insurance and Marketing Research Association, and Wink Incorporated's data, which you can find online, IULs are like you're saying, the market is basically determining they're kind of quote unquote the hottest product in life insurance since at least over the past decade. Can you kind of speak into that a little bit more?
Well, once again, I mean, okay, let's just use the last decade. So if I'm 42, right? I watched my dad in tech go through the dot-com boom where he lost half of his money.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw him go through the 2008, 2009 financial crisis and lose half of his money again.
Yeah.
Right. And so watching my parents go through that horrible process twice, right? Growing up and getting into my career earning, income earning age, I kind of took heed on that, right? Because do we really have that much time? Are we so prideful that we would think that we have all the time in the world that we can just take all the mistakes ourselves, or should we maybe learn from other people's mistakes, right? And save ourselves the time and anguish, right? And so I think a lot of people, because the pandemic dropped another 30% back in March of 2020, right? And then obviously we had that very quick recovery at about 6.5 months, right? And then 2021 was booming. Then 2022, obviously very down, right? Some people 10, 20, even 30% if they were heavily invested in tech stocks, which my dad has kind of been in. Okay. I think that's why the perceived value is so high, is people want to make money when the times are good. They want the return on the capital when the times are good, but they want the return of the capital when the times are bad. Like, just don't lose my money, right? If times are bad. And so I think with IUL, you kind of get that best of both worlds.
Okay. And how do you respond to those who are like, hey, the growth of the market's capped. I can't get as much on my money back as I can on, say, these other products that aren't capped. So how is not losing money more important than no cap?
Not losing money is probably more important than no cap. And here, I'll give you a math example on that. You take 100 grand, okay, and you lose 50%, which we've seen happen over the last 2 decades twice, right? Mm-hmm. So you lose 50%, you're down at 50 grand. What percent do you have to make up, right? Lars, you can't answer, you're in accounting. But what percent do you have to make up to get back to even? Most people would say, well, if I lost 50%, I got to make 50%. That's not true. If you lost 50%, you have to make up 100% to get back to even. So once again, anytime you lose money, you have to make up a multiple of that loss to break even, right? And that's to break even. That's not to get ahead. Okay. So a lot of people last year, like I said, you lost 20%. Well, what did I have to make? And I lost to break even. I had to make 27 the year prior. When I lost 20, I'm back at 0. Right. So there's also this fallacy out there of average returns. Oh, well, my portfolio is averaging me 6 or averaging me 7. Well, I could average 0 if I lost 50% and I made 50%. But what happened to my real money? I'm down negative 25%. So do you think most people care about what their actual money is doing or what they've been averaging? So it's more important to never lose money. Warren Buffett said it, and he's a billionaire. Just take his advice. He's got 2 rules. He says, rule number 1, never lose your money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. Right? And he's a billionaire. So once again, probably would be smart to heed some advice like that. Right.
Right.
And by the way, a lot of these products right now, these days, depending on the company and things, there's uncapped strategies. When these things first came out, just like with technology, right? You go, what? A screen this small on my phone? Unbelievable. Well, you would have said that 30 years ago, right? But now that the iPhones come out and, it's like, what? There's a calculator in here and a camera and a computer? No, impossible. It's like, well, you would have said that 20 years ago, but obviously things improve and get better. And the financial industry is no different, particularly when it comes to products that want to serve to the masses, right? They need to get these things better. They need to be competitive in the marketplace. So a lot of these strategies now are even uncapped.
Okay. Interesting. All right. And so Ghilarducci, go back to Ghilarducci in question 8. She believes that a pension-style retirement income on top of Social Security and Medicare is what's needed for a healthy and secure retirement. And there's a pension-style retirement income component for IULs, and even, let's say, Doug Andrews, like, okay, if you can't get an IUL, perhaps you don't qualify for it in terms of your health exam. Like FIAs might be good. Like Patrick Kelly is another one whose book you have behind you on the mantle. Are these? Yeah, there it is, right behind you. Are these an alternative, an option for that pension style retirement income that Gilbert usually says every American needs?
Yeah, that's a great point. And a lot of people, will say 40 years ago, when I was being born, my parents were young and just trying to survive, not think about retirement, but kind of there was this mention or this idea of what's called like the three-legged stool to retirement, right? And the three-legged stool to retirement, in case you don't know, is that you would have a pension from your job, right? You would have Social Security, and then you would need to have some form of personal savings that would also carry you through or supplement. That could be a 401k, that could be a bank account, it could be your brokerage account investments or whatever it is. And that was kind of what we're looking at. Well, now I don't know the exact statistic, but I mean, you're hard pressed to find a job unless it's in maybe public service, like fire, emergency services, police, something like that, possibly government. You'd be hard pressed to find a job that offers a pension these days, right? Most companies, I should say, or organizations have once again removed the onus and the responsibility from them, and they've placed it on the employee.
Yeah.
Right. DIY. So, we don't want to be responsible. Yeah. We don't want to be responsible for that. Like you handle it. Right. And so now the employee has to know about the investments. The employee takes the market risk. The employee pays the taxes. Right. And so it's very challenging. So if we can supplement with some of these vehicles, like maybe an IUL for the tax-free component, the fact that you never have to lose money in the market, right? And get some of these advantages here, or you can touch the money early to build wealth in other ways, whether that's real estate or other investments or things like that, and take advantage or double dip, if you will, on the way up on a market recovery. And then you look at an FIA, which is a fixed index annuity, where you have some of these pension-like income for life or guaranteed income components to them that are guaranteed to pay you even if you live to 120 years old. Right. And so what's interesting that I've also seen, kind of in the numbers that I've looked at, is because you're not having to worry about sometimes taxes or market loss or volatility, your withdrawal rate can actually be 2 to 3x what you would do in a typical portfolio, typical market portfolio. There's something called the 4% rule. And they say that, hey, if you take out 4% based on an average earnings, right, like you should not outlive your money. Well, I'm seeing in some of these, just based on no market volatility and not having to worry about taxes, which is a big chunk, obviously, in a lot of people's retirements, you could take out 5, 6, 7, 8%, right, on a withdrawal rate and still produce the same results there as far as diminishing down your principal or things of that nature. So I definitely agree that there is some sort of lifetime income component needed in people's portfolios. Social Security, once again, I'm 42. They say this thing's exhausted in the next 13 years, 12 years. Yeah. So I've never counted on that for my retirement. But the other challenge that we're seeing is that Social Security benefits are taxed depending on your income. And it's extremely low. The thresholds are extremely low, like $44,000 for a married couple, $36,000 for a single person or something. Last time I had checked, it could be slightly off there. But they're extremely low, and you're either getting taxed on 50% of your benefits or 85% of your benefits. So let me get this straight. I paid Social Security tax to put it in there on my income, right? My income tax. And then when I go to utilize this benefit, you had promised me 30, 40, 50 years ago, right? Then now you're actually going to tax me on that again, right? And so once again, it's kind of a way to keep money in the machine, if you will, with government programs and things of that. Don't get me started on that, but that's kind of what I see. That's my view. And so once again, it comes down to, hey, look, I'm all for government and taking care of people, but you and your family are probably the most important thing, in your life, and let's make sure that you're taken care of. And so how can we mitigate that? Don't lose money, not overpay in taxes, utilize multiple vehicles. There's no silver bullet, right? But utilize most of these vehicles and diversify enough so that you are in a good position, come hell or high water.
Yeah. And I think you already really touched on this and answered this, but question 9, James Knapp's 2 studies on Church of Christ pastors kind of revealed how they are somewhat of a microcosm of this American DIY retirement crisis, where they're over-reliant upon traditional retirement income like Social Security and IRAs. They're actually, for all participants in those 2 studies, the only 2 retirement income sources that were over 50% of our participants was Social Security and IRAs. And so how would you advise somebody who's kind of in that situation right now?
Yeah. If they're living off that right now, or you're saying
Or
like
just that's the only thing that they're
they're kind of waiting for
before
that.
they get there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I always say that people don't plan to fail, they fail to plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I respect pastors, I respect what they do. They're doing the Lord's work. And they're often very giving, but sometimes people aren't they're not the best at receiving. And so we want to make sure that they can actually plan accordingly. But like I said, some of these things that you really need to be on the lookout is, can you have your money working hard enough for you, whatever vehicle that is, okay, where you can earn, probably at least over time, 6 to 8%, which I think, in a fair amount of vehicles you can. Another thing to consider is the taxation, right? And that if you have all of your retirement tied up in something that you have to pay all of your taxes on, all of your retirement money, I don't know that that's the best choice or the best plan. And so you need to learn how to mitigate that. So, by the way, that could be a Roth IRA. Like if people are only saving, $6,000 a year, 6,500, it's at this year. And you're fine taking risk in the market, but at least you're growing tax-free. Now you're not going to be able to touch that before 59 and a half, right? So there's some restrictions there, and you can't make too much money, which obviously for most pastors is not the issue. But looking at some of these vehicles where we got to mitigate some of these things, I always compare it to, you're using Google Maps or Waze on your phone, and it's always telling you things like, hey, watch out for the traffic ahead, or look out for the cops, or there's a road hazard. And I go, man, I do the same thing. I just do it with money, watch out for inflation, watch out for the taxes, watch out for the market loss, So if you're working with someone that can at least bring these awarenesses to you, right? Going back to the stranger conversation, your future self is a stranger. If someone can maybe look down the road for you and say, these are the things you need to be concerned about or plan for, then I think we'd be far, far better off. But having 100% of your income getting taxed in retirement I do not see that as a good thing.
Right. Lars, any kind of follow-up or concluding questions as we try to wrap this conversation up?
Yeah, no, I've really appreciated kind of how you've helped us think through these things. One of the things I've been wrestling with is how to think about taxes differently, from a theological standpoint of how avoiding tax is often the motivation for us to pursue certain retirement vehicles. And as pastors, I think that was often the message we were given about our minister housing allowance, or some of the things with our clergy exemption that we could get out of Social Security. There was kind of these messages sent to us: avoid taxes at all costs. And I'm not sure that that's actually the right motivator for some of these things. I think minimizing taxes is a good thing, making sure that you're investing the money wisely. But I will stake my claim there to just say we should be cautious when our greatest motivator is to avoid taxes, because taxes, we are living in a country, and we have other countries that have higher tax rates, that have higher happiness rates, have satisfaction. So we should be cautious about making avoiding taxes our highest priority and motivator, because it is part of the common good as our community. Yes. I'm a big proponent of local taxation, that if we can pay local taxes and be invested in our local community, that's one way that we care for each other, is through local taxes. When it comes to national and federal income tax, I still am a good capitalist and have a little bit of a problem with big government. But I'm moving in this direction of viewing taxes not ultimately as bad. So And then the other thing I would just say is, as you're playing number games and things, when we're presenting facts, I mean, I know we do these math problems, and it's not, each person's situation. You would actually go through it with a financial advisor, and
Right.
and they can actually show you your numbers, and we're not just playing with numbers. But I will be caution people. No one actually lost exactly what the market says because you were invested differently. And so just when we're throwing out numbers like you lost 20% last year, that's not exactly true. A lot of funds and things had floors on them, or, there are different things out there. So we speak with generalities, and be careful when you're motivated by kind of generalities. Let's look into specific situations yourself. And again, for me, I'm drawn to the IUL from more of this positive standpoint of some of the benefits, and I'm interested in it. I think I've appreciated your positivity and things like that, because I think where I'm often cautious is when people are tugging on my fear strings. And so that's something I offer to pastors too, is just to say, hey, make sure you're motivated by hope and looking for the bright spots, and avoiding fear, because fear often is kind of the snake in the garden, trying to get us to grab hold of that fruit ourselves. So if I was going to ask you a final question, this would be to speak to our elder boards, or to the pastors' kind of bosses, if you will. So in Churches of Christ, we have an eldership. And what would you say to them? How could you help them understand, like, you need to take care of your pastor, and here's one of the vehicles, or here's one of the things that I would encourage you to look into as they're trying to think about benefits package. And again, maybe let's use that their salary for their pastor is like $50,000. The pastor's in his early 30s, married with 2 kids, and the church doesn't really have a unlimited budget, but they've got a little bit of money, and they could do something to care for that pastor's retirement. What would be your recommendation for them as they think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just, in the vein of this whole conversation about looking at financial vehicles, and we did spend a fair amount of time talking about, IUL specifically. So I would just say that, if there's a way that it maybe financially benefits, your church, right, as well as the pastor, it's not a win-lose, but it's actually a win-win, then, at least I would say consider that option, right? And meaning, right, if there's a way that the church, as part of this benefit package, could utilize that, whether they want to retain control of that vehicle, on behalf of the pastor, or not, so that they could be the steward over those funds still, or it's a benefit and they are placing it to the pastor, or passing it through to the pastor. So it's a benefit for him, and his family, let's say, as an example. I would definitely take a look at that. Beyond that, I also would just want to encourage that if we're wanting the church community to last, right, that we actually do need to plan. Okay. And it's not just looking at things that are perhaps plaguing us or causing an acute pain now, but how do we actually solve these things moving forward, right? If you want to solve something, they say, go to the root, don't look at the fruit. Right. And so it's like, if we could get things in place now that would benefit generations moving forward, right, then the church and church community and pastors as a whole would be far better off. And what I mean by that is, right, like I have 11 of these IULs. Okay. So obviously, that's one of the vehicles that I firmly believe in and I utilize. Okay. But I also think, like, well, wouldn't I want to leave an inheritance for my children's children? Right. And be a good steward right, of the money. And I feel like God can trust me with money because I do good things with it. For the best of my ability, I try to give back. I try to help other people. I try to do all that stuff, right? But I want my kids not to be trust fund babies, right? I'm teaching them the morals, the ethics, the all that stuff. But I would like them to be better off than I was. And I think any parent, if you ask them, do you want your kids to be better than you were, they would say, yeah, of course. Like, I don't want them to have a worse life. I want them to have at least my life or better, right? And then you would hope that would continue on. And so if there are some perhaps fundamental changes when we're talking about this type of stuff here with getting vehicles in place, it might start working in this generation, and by one generation down, right, we've actually seen some massive changes, and the next generation down, we've seen an even massive change, kind of the snowball effect, if you will. And that's kind of how I always look at it is yeah, we got to do what's right now. And I'll implore you, to obviously take care of yours and your own, because, these are the people that are bringing attendance, and these are the people doing God's work. And, obviously I would want to take care of them, and I do that at my own church. But I would just say, let's plan for the next 20, 30, 40 years. Let's not just plan for this church thing to be done in 5 to 10, and the way that we need to do that is we need to set some things in place to make sure finances last, right? Obviously morals and ethics and values are what taught there, and that's passed down too. Wealth is a lot of things. It's not just finances, right? It's a lot of things. It's your knowledge, it's your habits, it's your actions, it's your morals, it's your ethics, it's your values. And so how do we pass down more wealth to our pastors, to our churches, right, et cetera? So I would just, I would say that.
All right. And so, Austin, if people wanted to get a hold of you for financial advice and your services, how best can they get a hold of you?
Well, I'm on Instagram. That's probably the easiest way, at Austin Javen, AustinJaven. You can just send me a DM, and I'd be happy to connect or point you in the right direction, with anything else that you need. You're just looking for some more resources or a little more education, or you actually want to see what something like a plan would look like for you in your specific situation. Of course, more than happy to have a conversation. No obligation, no commitment. This is just what I'm passionate about. This is what I've committed my life to. And I love doing this. So happy to help out today, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, thank you for being on here, Austin. This was great, and I know that this is going to add a lot of value to our 16 episode series that we're creating here called Almost Essential. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks. We'll see you later. And for those of you, our listeners and our viewers, this is, I believe, episode 6. And so be waiting for a few more episodes to be coming out over the course of the next couple weeks and months. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Once again, thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Almost Essential podcast. If you like what you heard and you want to reach out, you can connect with me, Jordan Koss, on Facebook or Instagram. We hope this series is a valuable resource for you, pastor or otherwise. And remember, you are not almost essential. Your role and service in the church is essential, as well as saving for retirement within your holy vocation and calling.